Good evening, everybody. My name is Michael Badnarik. My website is constitutionpreservation.org. And my motto for many years is lighting the fires of liberty, one heart at a time. That is the only way that you can do it. Liberty does not live in the Constitution, doesn't live in the Bill of Rights. Liberty doesn't even live in the Declaration of Independence. If liberty does not live in your heart, then it does not exist at all. My book is called Good to be King, Foundation of Our Constitutional Freedom. And this is the beginning of an 8-hour class called An Introduction to the Constitution. It will bring you the basics. I guarantee it will generate more questions than it answers. But I can always be available to answer those questions in the future. Let us begin. And my slide is not advancing. There we go. Most of what you think you know about the Constitution and our government is wrong. This is a pretty bold statement, but based on the number of people that I've talked to, very few people know what the Constitution says, much less what it means. Even the Supreme Court is pretty lame when it comes to the Constitution. Let us prove that. My first question is, when was the Declaration of Independence signed? Your answer is probably 4th of July, 1776. That's the most common answer, but that answer is wrong. You have to understand how the Declaration was eventually written. There was a committee in Philadelphia. They said, well, come on, let's vote. But the delegates were hesitant to vote because they didn't know what they were voting on. They wanted to see it on paper. So a subcommittee was formed. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Robert Livingston, and I forget the last one. 5 people. And of those 5 people, the person who got the responsibility of writing the Declaration was the low man on the totem pole, Thomas Jefferson. He did not get the job because he would eventually be the 3rd president of the United States. He got the job for the reason most of us get the job, is that we're the youngest guy in the group, and all the elders are going out to drink ale, and you get to do the hard work. So Thomas Jefferson wrote a Declaration of Independence. This is his draft. That was approximately 1,000 words longer than the Declaration of Independence that you're familiar with. It had all sorts of things. Thomas Jefferson was very proud of it, but then the subcommittee had to bring that draft document back to the full committee, and they analyzed it. They voted on it, and most of the committee was upset with various clauses. They said, no, the southern states in particular, they didn't like the clauses on slavery, so we're going to have to cross those out. Thomas Jefferson was upset. They were destroying what he thought was a nearly perfect document, and they ended up with a document much smaller. And this is text from Thomas Jefferson's Declaration. You can see that it's similar to, but not exactly the same. We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable, instead of what we both know. So that draft was then modified and printed by a printer. The delegates voted on the wording of the Declaration on the 4th of July. They made the final version official, but there wasn't any printing of it except for the modified draft. So they took the draft to a printer named Dunlop. Mr. Dunlop printed 200 copies of the Declaration. They look like this. You can see that it's all left justified. Looks pretty much like a newspaper. And those 200 copies were distributed. If you're going to declare your independence, you have to let people know about it. Presumably, George Washington read his copy of the Declaration to the troops at Valley Forge. But this is not signed. You can see that John Hancock's name is printed at the bottom. But this is also not the Declaration of Independence that most of us are familiar with. Most of us are familiar with this. This is the calligraphy version. And if you look very, very closely, you'll notice that there are no typographical errors at all. How do you write a full-page poster-sized note like this without a single typographical error? Well, the answer is that you are copying word for word, literally letter for letter, from the typewritten version. And eventually, once you had this beautiful calligraphy official version, then you gathered all the delegates together again, and they all began signing the Declaration of Independence on August 4th. So when was the Declaration of Independence signed? It was signed on August 2nd, 1776. It was only voted on and approved 4th of July. So, all right, perhaps this is just a trivial joke, something you can use at the local bar to win a beer the next time you go. I am willing to bet money that you don't know who the first president of the United States was. Now, if you're older than second grade, most of your answers are going to be George Washington. You know, first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen. But that is not correct. George Washington became president in 1789. And we may not agree about the exact date in 1776 the Declaration was signed, but we became the United States in 1776. If Washington was president in 1789, what happened in those first 13 years? We were all running around wondering who's in charge. If you think back really hard, you will probably remember the phrase Articles of Confederation. You may not even know what it was, but it was technically the first constitution for the United States. And under the Articles of Confederation, we elected a new chief executive, basically a new president of the United States every year. The first president of the United States was Samuel Huntington. There were 9 other presidents of the United States before George Washington. So George Washington was the 11th president of the United States. He was the first president of the United States under the Constitution, but that's not when the United States began. So your answer is not 100% wrong, but it's not 100% right either. So most of this information is completely unknown to, I don't know, anybody that I talk to. And so if you didn't know when the Declaration of Independence was signed or who the first president of the United States was, then there's a strong possibility that there are things about the Constitution that you don't know. And I'm pretty much guaranteed that that's true, but you should know. The Constitution is supposed to be our founding document. That's supposed to control the federal government. And the federal government is currently controlling your life, which it just doesn't make any sense. So how do we put all this into perspective? I am not the first person worried about corruption in government. Daniel Webster, who was a lawyer, not the guy that wrote the dictionary, back in 1837 said, "I apprehend no danger to our country from a foreign foe. Our destruction, should it come at all, will be from another quarter. From the inattention of the people to the concerns of their government, from their carelessness and negligence, I must confess that I do apprehend some danger. I fear that they may place too implicit a confidence in their public servants and fail properly to scrutinize their conduct, that in this way they may be made the dupes of designing men and become the instruments of their own undoing. make them intelligent, and they will be vigilant. Give them the means of detecting the wrong, and they will apply the remedy. So let me ask, how many of you know who your 2 senators are? How many of you know who your congressman is? Do you have their phone number on speed dial? Have you ever written these people a letter? Are you guilty of being careless and negligent about the people that are elected to Congress? And from this point, I apprehend some danger. You place too implicit a confidence in your public servants, and that is why they are ruining your lives, and you are not even conscious of the fact that they are doing it. Ignorance is bliss, but it is still ignorance. I've never heard anybody brag about how stupid they were. In fact, people get pretty upset if you accuse them of being less than knowledgeable. But what you don't know can definitely hurt you. So this is chapter 1 of my first book. I am an iconoclast, a breaker or destroyer of images. I am going to rattle your cage. Most of what you think you know about the government is absolutely wrong. I will continue to prove it. And by the time I'm done with tonight's presentation, you may be wondering if 2 + 2 is still equal to 4. So if you feel a little bit lightheaded and you have a little sense of vertigo, not quite sure what country you live in anymore, then you have in fact been paying attention. Please note, if you have a copy of my book, the page numbers are at the top right, so that if you doze off or you start daydreaming about something, it's easy for you to come back and figure out where we're talking. The most important chapter in my book, the most important concept in my class, is rights versus privileges. All of our political problems stem from the fact that Americans don't know the difference between rights and privileges. The most important chapter in the book, most important concept in the class, and it's available for free download at my website. Please download it, read it, understand it, and share it with all of your friends and acquaintances. If by chance everybody in the United States were to read and understand this chapter, a lot of our political problems would start to melt like snow in the spring. A right is defined by Black's Law Dictionary as a power, privilege, faculty, or demand inherent in one person and incident upon another. Most important word here is inherent. Inherent means a defining characteristic. Imagine that I'm holding a brick of lead. What can you tell me about my brick of lead? Well, about the only thing that you can tell me if you've never taken chemistry is that it's heavy. Lead is heavy. Those 2 words are practically synonymous. I am unable to put lead into a vacuum and suck all the heavy out. I can't put a brick of lead in a microwave and zap it for a couple of minutes and have it come out light and fluffy. If it's not heavy, it's definitely not lead. This is a defining characteristic, one that you cannot change. The thoughts that you are having right now are inherent. I can say, I'm in charge of this presentation. Nobody's allowed to think of a black cat. Even if you wanted to follow my instruction, you still have to think about a black cat so you could draw the circle and line through it. So your thoughts are inherent. Nobody can change your thoughts except you. The dreams that you had last night, those are inherent. When you die, your dreams die with you. You're not going to go to sleep with earplugs worrying that somebody's going to steal your favorite dream in the middle of the night. So your dreams are inherent, your thoughts are inherent, and your rights are inherent. Nobody can take them from you, and you can't give them away even if you wanted to. Like your lungs or your heart, you're going to just hand them to somebody? No. They are a part of who you are. They will always be a part of who you are. And you need to understand that your rights are unchangeable. You have your rights because you were born. Now, Black's Law Dictionary defines a privilege as a particular and peculiar benefit or advantage enjoyed by a person, company, or class beyond the common advantages of other citizens. My shortened example is that it is something that a higher authority allows you to do. If Richard and I happen to live next door to each other, and unfortunately, Krispy Kreme donut lives, exists on the far side of Richard's land. Can I get up and walk across Richard's land to Krispy Kreme donuts anytime I want? The answer is no. I have to get Richard's permission to cross his land. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Richard says, sure, Mike, no problem. What are friends for? But on Thursday, he's misplaced his winning lottery ticket. The dog bit him. He's got a bunch of honeydew chores that he doesn't want to do. Just having a bad hair day. And I get ready to take my walk to Krispy Kreme, and Richard says, hey, walk around. That's what fences are for. Richard can do that because walking on Richard's land is a privilege, and I need to get permission to do that. Walking on my land is a right. I don't have to ask anybody to walk on my land. I own it. So this is an important distinction. You need to understand this down to your DNA. Rights and privileges are opposite. Either you need permission or you don't. There is no third possibility. You flip a coin, it's either heads or tails. There's no third option. It's either true or false. It's not like, well, maybe sometimes. Rights and privileges are opposite. If you can do it without permission, it is a right. If somebody is asking you to get permission, then they think it's a privilege. And if you don't understand the difference between rights and privileges, you will succumb and ask for permission to exercise your rights. Now, if we agree that rights and privileges are opposites and there is no third possibility, there are three corollaries, three things that are true because this axiom is true. The first is that all rights are derived from property. In my example, if I own the land, I have a right to walk on the property. And if Richard owns the land, I need to get permission. It is a privilege to walk on Richard's property. Now, I have people say, Michael, I have a right to life, but I don't own a farm. Please note that I did not say that all rights are derived from land. I said that all rights are derived from property. Who owns your body? People look at me like I'm confused when I ask that question. They think, well, duh, of course I own my body. Really? So if you own your body, why does the government prohibit you from smoking marijuana or taking cocaine? Why does the government mandate that you have to have, an injection for this and vaccines for that? If you own your body, then you decide what you drink, you decide what you eat, and you decide whether or not somebody is going to inject a needle into your body and infect you with some kind of test virus. If you don't recognize your body as the most important property that you own, then your understanding of rights and privileges is not complete. There is a one-word answer for every question about the Constitution. This makes it really simple. The word is property. The entire Constitution is all about property. That's what we are defending. In England, King George III owned everything. He owned land, he owned parts of China, he owned stuff around the world. And since you are standing on King George's property, if you can't pick both feet up off the floor at the same time, then you are a subject. You have to get permission for everything that you do from the king. And we went, screw that. We came to North America. We wrote the Declaration and the Constitution. The purpose of the Constitution is to defend your life, your liberty, and your private property. During my 8-hour class, I challenged my students. I said, if you don't understand a question, raise your hand and boldly answer property. And even if you don't know why that was the right answer, I will explain it for you, and you will be correct. It seems too simple that this is the only thing that you need to understand, but this is the one fundamental word that describes what the Constitution is all about. In fact, John Adams, the 12th president of the United States, right after George Washington, said the moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred as the law of God, and that there is not a force of law and public justice to protect it, then anarchy and tyranny commence. Now, I'm not quite sure what your religious beliefs are, but if property is as sacred as the law of God, it's going to factor into the equation somewhere. This is what the whole Constitution is about. This is what the United States is predicated on. The second corollary is that every right implies a responsibility. Now, do a man and woman have a right to have a child? I'm pretty sure they do. I don't know anybody that would openly argue against it. Please note that in China, you're only allowed to have, I think it's Japan, you're only allowed to have one child. If you have two, the government will, give you a financial penalty. But here in the United States, it is assumed so far that a man and woman do have a right to have a child. Once the child is born, who's responsible for sheltering the child? Well, that would be the parent. Who's responsible for feeding the child? Well, that would be the parent. So you have a right to have children, but you have a responsibility to care for that child until the child is able to be responsible for themselves. So I have a right to keep and bear arms. That does not give me the right to go into your bank and withdraw your money. I have a responsibility, a big responsibility, to control my weapon, to make sure that nobody gets hurt accidentally. On the other hand, if somebody in my vicinity is being threatened or, abused, then I can use my weapon to immediately stop the violence. So you have a responsibility to put food in your mouth. You have a responsibility to provide your own shelter. Who is responsible for saving money for your retirement? That would be you. However, our parents and grandparents were lied to. Franklin Delano Roosevelt suggested to us that the government is bigger than we are. The government is smarter than we are. So we are going to take your Social Security money. We are going to invest it for you. And when you are ready to retire, you are going to have more money than you know what to do with. Really? How many people do you know who feel secure on Social Security? Nobody. Elderly people are worried because they have to decide whether they're going to buy food or medication this month because Social Security won't cover both. So you give your responsibility to the government, and then you're not happy with the way the government handles your responsibility? Why did you give your responsibility to the government in the first place? It is true. Every once in a while, the government comes and takes you one of your rights away. Most of the time, however, you are giving them your responsibility because you're too lazy or too stupid to do it on your own. And so you've given your responsibility away. You've also given your rights away. So don't point at the government and complain that they are stealing from you. Look in the mirror and look at the person who is causing the problem. If you want to have your rights, you need to assume your responsibility. I used to be an avid skydiver and a skydiving instructor. I'll give you one guess. Who do you think packed my parachute? That would be me. Because as I'm falling towards the ground at 120 miles an hour, the last thing I want to do with the last 10 seconds of my life is use your name in vain because you packed my parachute improperly. If I'm going to die, it's because I screwed up and I'm the only person to blame. So most of our problems are caused because we give our responsibilities away, not because the evil government comes and takes our rights. The third axiom, or the third corollary, is that the only limitation on your rights is the equal rights of others. In other words, you have complete 100% control over your property. You have zero control, none, zip, nada, over somebody else's property. Now, you can wish that you had somebody else's property, but if you go so far as to take somebody else's property, that is theft. When I was running for president in 2004, another presidential nominee was suggesting an amendment to the Constitution to protect your right to health care. They were going to make an amendment to the Constitution. The only problem with that is you don't have a right to health care. If you did have a right to health care, you'd be able to walk into the doctor's office or the hospital and go, I'm sick, fix me. And the doctors and nurses would be required to fix you for free. Now, I'm going to take a wild guess and suggest that none of you is willing to do your job for free. Each of you is capitalistic enough to think that your time, your life is valuable. And if you're going to be working for someone else, then you deserve to get paid for it. I agree. But if you deserve to get paid for your job, shouldn't the doctors and nurses get paid for what they do? And the socialist response is, oh, don't worry. The government is going to pay for your doctor. I don't understand. How does that work? Well, the government is going to come and take $100 out of my wallet, and they're going to keep $50 for air conditioning and, corruption and overhead, and they're going to give the other $50 to your doctor. Doesn't that sound inefficient? I mean, you're not getting all of the medical care that you possibly could. Wouldn't it be more efficient for you to walk into my apartment, take $100 out of my wallet, and you'd be able to buy twice as much health care? The only problem with that is that I am a strong Second Amendment supporter. And if you walk into my apartment and take $100 out of my wallet, then you're going to need, twice as much health care. Whatever you were planning to go to the doctor with before is now the second priority on your list. You're going to have several ounces of weight gain and, the threat of, lead poisoning. You do not have a right to my property. I don't care how bad you want it. I want your property. I have terrible heart disease. My doctor says I need a transplant. You're going to give me your heart, right? As soon as I explain how desperate I am and that I could die if I don't get your heart, too bad, so sad. I don't care how badly my sob story is. I still have no justification for taking your property. So rights and privileges are opposites. All of your rights are derived from property, including your body, which you better own. Every right implies a responsibility. They're opposite sides of the same coin. And we're in trouble because most people are irresponsible. The only limitation on your rights is the equal rights of others. You can control your property. You have no control over someone else's property. This is the end result. This is the stuff that you have to know in order to understand anything about the United States, anything about the Constitution. So download chapter 2, read it until you understand it, and then you can begin your journey to hopefully understand more of the Constitution. Chapter 3 is all about individual rights. If I was a mathematician and I wrote a book called Round Circles, would you think that I was a brilliant mathematician? Or would you laugh and chuckle going, well, duh. Of course they're round circles. You know, if it wasn't round, it wouldn't be a circle. This is how I feel about this chapter title, individual rights. It should be painfully obvious, but unfortunately it's not. The only kind of rights that exist, the only kind of rights that exist are individuals' rights. That's the only kind. Please note, I hate the phrase constitutional rights. This surprises people because I spent the last 25 years running around the country teaching as many people I can about the Constitution. I'm known as a constitutional scholar. You look up the word Constitution and my name is one of the first that comes up on Google. How could I possibly hate the phrase constitutional rights? The answer is because when you say that over and over and over again, where does it sound like your rights come from? Your rights do not come from the Constitution. Your rights do not come from the Bill of Rights. Your rights don't come from the Declaration of Independence. Those are merely pieces of paper. Did you not have freedom of a right to life prior to the Declaration of Independence? Did you not have freedom of speech, freedom of religion prior to the First Amendment? Absolutely. Your rights came first. The Constitution was merely there to document your rights, not to grant them to you. If something gives them to you, they are not rights, they are privileges. The only type of rights that exist are individual rights. Please, please, please do not say constitutional rights. Eradicate that from your vocabulary. There's no such thing as constitutional rights, only individual rights. We are at war. It is an ideological war, which means that it is a war of ideas and a war of words. And we are losing that war because you don't even know there's a war being waged. All you know is that you're miserable and you're watching CNN and Fox News and you're really confused. And it's like, gosh, you know, how do those people keep taking away my guns? How do they keep forcing me to have, you know, an injection of this, that, or the other thing? You know, how come the government is in charge when I really don't want them to be? That's because you don't understand the ideas. You have allowed yourself to be hoodwinked in this war of words. For example, community rights. Now, I apologize, I didn't say that properly. Whenever you use this phrase, you're supposed to say it with a loving, liberal tone, like community rights. Like we should all do a big group hug, sing kumbaya, because we have community rights. This is BS. Communities do not exist. They are abstract. We're here on Autonomy tonight. We form a small temporary community. do you have more rights or less rights because you're listening to this webinar? You woke up this morning, imagine that you walked into the bathroom, stretched, looked into the mirror, and you're all by yourself in the bathroom. Did you or did you not have individual rights? Yeah. Now you come here to this webinar. Do you have more rights or less rights because you're listening? None. It's the same exact individual rights. Those rights come with you and go with you whether you are part of a community or not. The reason that they use the phrase community rights is because they imply that community rights will supersede individual rights. And if they convince you that that is true, then when they say, well, the community has this right or that right, you are incapable of defending your individual rights because you've been mentally inoculated with some devious idea that community rights come first. There's no such thing as community rights. Individual rights are at the top of the pyramid. Nothing supersedes individual rights. Not a congressional decree, not a edict from the Pope. I don't care what it is, your individual rights are sacrosanct. Nothing is more important than your individual rights. And Thomas Jefferson said, you only have the rights that you are willing to fight for. If you start to talk and I say, sit down and shut up, and you're intimidated by me and you sit down, what happened to your freedom of speech? It's not because I took it from you, it's because you didn't have the courage to exercise your freedom of speech. I was running for president, gave a presentation at a college, and there were only like 10 or 12 students in the front row. I suggested that we go to a classroom. It would be smaller, a little more informal. And they said, no, can't do that. I said, why? The classrooms are all locked? I said, no, you are a presidential candidate. You must be in the auditorium because the auditorium is a free speech zone. I said, what? What about the hallway? What about the rest of the campus? And they laughed and said, no, that's a speech-free zone. And I pointed to my cowboy boots and I said, anywhere I happen to be standing is a free speech zone. The government doesn't tell me what I can or cannot say. The government doesn't tell me where I can or cannot say it. I have freedom of speech, not because the founding fathers ratified the First Amendment back in 1791. I have freedom of speech because I have never met a son of a bitch big enough to shut me up. You only have the rights that you are willing to fight for. And if you allow anybody, government, FBI, sheriff, I don't care, any other human individual, if you allow them to intimidate you into not exercising your individual rights, that's your problem. Another phrase, which is a lie, is the greatest good for the greatest number. Sounds good. I know that most of you have heard this before. I don't know how many of you know where it comes from. It comes from the Communist Manifesto. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. In other words, we all work and the government is going to decide how much everybody is going to get. So let's assume that you have a bunch of farmers and some farmers are generating twice as much output. The government's going to take all of the food and distribute it evenly. So where's the motivation to work harder? And the joke is that in Russia, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. Community rights in the greatest good means that everybody's going to be at the same level. But what they don't tell you is that everybody's going to be at the poverty level because there is no motivation for doing better than average. Anytime the government gives you permission, they let you know that you have permission because they give you a permit or a license. Permit is a verb: to suffer, allow, consent, to give leave or license to. I'm allowing something to happen. A license is a personal privilege that I'm giving you to do some particular act or series of acts on land without possessing any estate or interest therein, and is ordinarily revocable at the will of the licensor. I'm going to give you a little example to drive this point home. I can walk back and forth on my property anytime I want. I have a right to walk on my property. I need Richard's permission to walk across his property. But I go to Krispy Kreme at 6 o'clock in the morning, and Richard is frankly getting a little bit tired of my phone calls at 5:55 in the morning, waking him up to ask if it's okay if I cross his land again. Richard would like to sleep late. And so Richard devises this plan. He takes my photograph, puts it on a little card, and he has a similar card at the guard shack. So now, instead of calling Richard on the phone, all I have to do is arrive at the guard shack, show the guard my license, and that license will allow me to do some particular act, as in walk across Richard's land, without possessing any estate or interest therein. It's not my land. I have no right to walk across the land, but if Richard gives me a license, it allows me to do what Richard can do without a license. Richard shows up at the security gate. The guard's not going to say, Mr. Grove, can I see your ID? Because the guard's going to be smart enough to know that Richard is signing his paycheck, and he's going to say, oh, yes, Mr. Grove, welcome back. So Richard can walk back and forth across his property without a license. A license allows me to do it even though I don't own any of it. Now, let's take a philosophical walk through the park. If you have a marriage license, what do you have permission to do now that you didn't have permission to do before? Who gave you that permission? And more to the point, where did they get the authority to give you permission in the first place? Did Thomas Jefferson have a marriage license? Nope. Did George Washington have a marriage license? Not at all. So where did the first marriage license come from? Well, if we look up marriage license in the law dictionary, we find out that it is a license or permission granted by public authority, whatever that means, to persons who intend to intermarry. Intermarriage is the same as miscegenation. If we look up miscegenation in the dictionary, it is a mixture of the races, and it says this term used to apply to marriage between persons of different races, and there were laws or statutes prohibiting marriage between persons of different races. Of course, those laws have been struck down as invalid, but let's think back. Can two white people live together and make babies? Well, yeah, they have rights. They can do anything they want. Can a black couple live together and make babies? Well, they were slaves. They had no control over where they lived. And if they were lucky enough to have a child, we just considered that animal husbandry. We had more slaves. So can a white person and a black person get married? Oh my God, say it isn't so. We couldn't possibly have those black boys sleeping with our white girls now, could we? My God, society would come to an end, the world would stop turning? Well, no, it won't. But eventually, we were able to strike these things down. But at the very beginning, A marriage license was required for a black person. A black person had to get a marriage license to gain permission to marry a white person. Okay, was a marriage license created to increase interracial marriages? No, it was to prevent them. If I convince you that you have to have a permit or a license, then when you come to ask for your permit or license, all I have to do is say, no, you don't have permission. Let's apply this to guns. Let's say that you want to carry a gun and you go and fill out a form to get a concealed carry permit. Wonderful. Every year you renew your concealed carry permit. On the 11th year, you go to renew and they go, I'm sorry, we're not going to renew your concealed carry permit. Are you in trouble when they refuse to renew your permit? Or are you in trouble 10 years ago when you accepted the idea that you needed permission? Who gave them the authority to decide whether or not you could defend yourself? I know that all of these questions are disturbing, but you need to think about them because you need to understand the proper flow of power in the United States government. Individual rights, let's quickly look at traffic, is defined as commerce, the trade, sale, or exchange of merchandise, bills, money, and the like. The only time we use the word traffic correctly is when we're talking about drug traffic. We're not talking about a brick of cocaine traveling down the highway. We're talking about buying and selling drugs. Commerce is the exchange of goods, productions, or property of any kind. Transportation is the movement of goods or persons from one place to another by a carrier. A carrier is someone engaged in transporting passengers or goods for hire. And a passenger, in general, is a person who gives compensation to another for transportation. The common denominator in all of these statutes is commerce. You are engaged in some form of business. You could be a truck driver, a bus driver, a cab driver, and you are engaged in traffic. However, if you and I decide to go to lunch together and we get into my automobile and we get to the restaurant and I don't charge you money for taking you to the restaurant, then my automobile is not a vehicle. I am not a driver, and you are certainly not a passenger. These are all legal terms that you have been tricked into assuming. Okay, you assume that you are driving. You get any money when you got out of the car? No. Well, then you're not driving. You are exercising your right to travel. Just as a, let you know, I have not had a driver's license in 23 years. Don't want one, you can't force me to take one. I know my rights, I have a right to travel, and I am not engaged in commerce. Hassel versus State, this is from the Court of Criminal Appeals. It says there being no such thing as a driver's license known to the law, it follows that the information in charging the driving of a motor vehicle upon a public highway without such a license charges no offense. Because of the defect in the information, the judgment is reversed and the prosecution is ordered dismissed. You do not require a driver's license in Texas. If I am giving you a bill and you have to pay a tax on every four-sided triangle that you have, how much tax can you pay? There's no such thing as a four-sided triangle, and so a tax on a four-sided triangle is meaningless, and you're an idiot if you pay it. You are not required to have a driver's license because in Texas, there's no such thing. So I can teach people a whole lot more about how to do that, but not in the span of this class. Very quickly, sovereignty. What is sovereignty? Sovereignty is a person, body, or state in which independent and supreme authority is vested. In other words, I'm the mommy, that's why. In other words, if you are so high in authority that there is no one left for you to ask, then you are sovereign. Mommy decides whether or not you eat your vegetables. Mommy decides whether you get to watch TV before you do your homework. And mommy decides what time is bedtime. And if you want to stay up late, I can probably explain it to you, but it would take me an hour and a half to explain it to you, and that would be way past your bedtime. And so the short answer is because I'm the mommy. That's why. In other words, I don't need a reason, and there is nobody here that's going to, challenge my authority. So, mommy in this circumstance is sovereign. Who is sovereign in the United States? Who makes the decisions about what happens in your life? In any question, any decision about your life, either you can make that decision or the government can make the decision for you. Who do you think is the best person to make decisions about your life? I'm guessing that would be you. Congress doesn't even know you, much less knows what's best for you. Why do you allow the government to make decisions for you? Are you still a child? Do you let your parents make decisions for you? Or do you consider yourself an adult? I want to go out for a beer. I'm not going to ask mom if it's okay. I'm just going to go out for a beer. So if you're going to get in your car and travel, exercise your right to travel, why would you ask for permission? There's no reason for you to ask for government permission for, just about anything, because we, the people, created the government works for us. Now, William Pitt in 1789 was in England trying to explain to all these English people what this new United States government was looking like. And he said, the poorest man may in his cottage bid defiance to all the forces of the crown. It may be frail, its roof may shake, the wind may blow through it, the storms may enter, the rain may enter, but the King of England cannot enter. All his forces dare not cross the threshold of the ruined tenement. That's because the king don't own it, you do. It may be a tar paper shack, but it is your type of tar paper shack, and you are the king of your castle, even if it's just kind of thrown together. This is where the idea of being the king of your castle comes in. Now, if you don't think of yourself as the king, if you don't make all of the decisions in your life, then you are, in effect, a slave to the government. The Declaration of Independence says that when any form of government becomes destructive of your rights, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. If we, the people, can abolish the government, what does that tell you about the flow of power? And people say, well, Michael, we can't get rid of the Constitution. It's the, supreme law of the land. Really? The Articles of Confederation were originally the supreme law of the land. They were supposed to last in perpetuity. In other words, forever. And 9 years later, we shit-canned the Articles of Confederation and came up with the Constitution. The Constitution is the second Constitution ruling over the United States. So don't tell me that we can't abolish the Constitution. Well, I don't think we need to abolish it. We just need to enforce it at this point. And lest you be in any doubt about the flow of authority, the Declaration also says, when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security. So you don't have to answer the question to me, but think about it. Are we suffering a long train of abuses and usurpations Is the CIA and FBI monitoring every phone call, every email that you send, every Facebook post? You don't know that there's a program out there called Carnivore that tracks every electronic communication that you have, and you don't think the government is eager and willing to use that against you? Then you don't even understand what absolute despotism is. If you don't take the responsibility to change this government, then you are well on your way to slavery. This government, this country, with its institution, belong to the people who inhabit it. Whenever they shall grow weary of the existing government, they can exercise their constitutional right of amending it or their constitutional right to dismember or overthrow it. So very quickly, I'm going to go through forms of government. You decide which one you want to live under. Monarchy is ruled by one. The king writes the law. Everybody else is supposed to jump in line and say, sir, yes, sir, that's the way we're going to do it. There is no vote. Everybody is going to do what the king says. Well, believe it or not, monarchy is everyone's favorite form of government, as long as they are the monarch. When you're driving to work and there's a big traffic jam in front of you, you say, you know, if I was in charge, everybody would pull over onto the shoulder and I would just drive right on by so that I could get to work on time. And in other words, everybody is going to live by the rules that you write because, you know, they have to make you happy. Well, I don't want to live under your monarchy. I'm pretty sure you don't want to live under mine. And so we go to oligarchy. We don't trust the king. We create a subcommittee, 535 people who make the rules, and those rules are made up by the few and then applied to the majority. Anybody notice that most of the laws that come out of Congress is exempt from those laws? That doesn't strike you as a little bit odd, or at least a little unfair? So oligarchy is ruled by the few. Well, okay, let's change that. Let's give everybody a chance, and we can create democracy. This is a Greek word that means literally rule by the many, a pure democracy. Everybody gets together in the Colosseum to vote. But be advised, the United States is not a democracy. Okay? Alexander Fraser Tyler said a democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves largesse for property from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy, followed always by a dictatorship. When Barack Obama got elected the first time, there was a woman who was all excited because now she wasn't going to have to pay her mortgage, because somehow Barack Obama was going to pay her mortgage. Okay, people voted for Barack Obama because he was promising them the most stuff. And that's why the liberals are, succeeding as much as they do, because they always promise the most stuff. But please note that when you start voting property out of the treasury, okay, the result is that democracy will always collapse over loose fiscal policy. How many people think that the United States is suffering from a loose fiscal policy? Every 2 years, we just vote to raise the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling technically says we can't borrow any more than that, but what the hell? All we have to do is just vote to raise the debt ceiling, and there's no limit on our debt at all. And when you're collapsing over loose fiscal policy, it is followed always by a dictatorship. Why? Because the people go, life sucks, ain't got nothing good, can't get no satisfaction. We need a strong dictator. That's exactly how Adolf Hitler came to power. not because he rolled into Berlin with army tanks and, basically took over by military coup. Adolf Hitler was voted into office by, in some cases, 98% of the vote. So it's happening here in the United States. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we are in really, really serious trouble. In a democracy, people can vote on everything. We can decide to vote on the color of Richard's living room. My favorite color is red. If I can get everybody on this webinar to vote for red, we'll even let Richard vote. He can vote against red, but because it's a democracy, we win and we show up at his apartment on Saturday with rollers and paintbrushes. In a democracy, people can vote on anything. They can vote on your property. They can vote on your freedom of speech. They can vote on your right to carry a gun. Okay? In a democracy, 51% can vote away the rights and property of 49%. We do not live in a democracy. We do not live in a democracy. In a republic, there are certain things you're not allowed to vote on. In other words, my rights and my property. I mean, you could take the vote, but, doesn't mean a damn thing. I went to Rhode Island, which is a left-leaning state, and I gave a little speech, and one of the girls stood up and said, "Mr. Badnarik, couldn't we vote to take your guns away?" And I said, "You certainly could, but then you'd have to take another vote to see who's going to try to take them. And that's not a vote I recommend you win. I have freedom of speech, whether you like what I have to say or not. You don't get to vote on what I have to say. And you don't get to vote on my Second Amendment rights either. You don't get to decide what is a Saturday night special, what is a cop killer bullet, what is an assault rifle. Did you know that when I'm holding it, it's an assault rifle, and when a police officer's holding it, it's an anti-assault rifle, and there's no switch on the side to flip from one to the other. So when I'm holding it, it is definitely an anti-assault rifle. Anybody assaults me, and that thing is gonna sing. Socialism is a theory or system of social organization which advocates the vesting of ownership and control of the means of production in the community as a whole. It is not your car, it is our car, and we will allow you to drive it for a while. It is not your house, it is our house, and we will allow you to live there until we change our mind. Socialism is defined as the imperfect implementation of collectivist principles. So what is the perfect implementation of collectivist principles? It is communism, which is a theory or system of social organization based on the holding of all property in common. Actual ownership being ascribed to the community as a whole or to the state. So in other words, in communism, you have no property. Let's put a bookmark here. At the very beginning, where did I say all of your rights are derived from? If you're paying attention, all of your rights are derived from property. If you have no property, you have no rights. This is why communism is bad. Not because they generally have a red flag, not because their soldiers march funny, but because communism does not believe in property at all. It's not your property, it's stuff that the state owns. Communism and the Constitution are mutually exclusive. They do not overlap at all. It can be true or it can be false. You can have the Constitution where your property is protected, or you can have communism where you don't have any property or rights at all. Your choice. Communist Manifesto. I encourage you to get a copy of the Communist Manifesto. Read it. It's very short. You will discover that their number one plank, there are 10 planks to the Communist Manifesto. Number one is the abolition of private property. No private property, no rights. 1 tells you what they're going to do. 2 through 10 tell you how they are going to do it. Number 2, a heavy progressive income tax. In the United States, we call that the IRS. Number 5, a central bank. In the United States, we call that the Federal Reserve. Number 6, government control of communication and transportation. How many of you have been watching TV and had, this is a test. This is only a test. This is a test of the, emergency broadcast system. It's not a test as to whether or not they can warn you about a tornado. It is a test to see if government really does have control of every television and radio station. Absolutely. Transportation, you think you can't drive a car without a driver's license. You got to go to the DMV. You can't get on an airplane without, being in line with the FAA. The government is controlling almost everything that you do, and you let it. Why? Number 10, government control of education. This is the most devious one, because if you allow the government to control education, if you allow them to control what their children are learning, then they will teach the students socialism. That's why children are not required to really learn math or science. They just get participation trophies. They learn to be complacent workers for the government. The teacher is always right. The police officer is always right. What do you do when confronted with authority? You become submissive. You do what you are told. That's what our children are being trained to do. So that old farts like me will go, no, there's no way you're taking my property. There's no way you're giving me a mandatory injection. There is no way you are taking any of my guns. No way. 0. Hell will freeze over twice. But I'm old, I'm stubborn, and I understand my rights. When your children are taught to be docile and submissive to authority, they are not being taught the Constitution. They are being taught that the government is always right, police officers are always right, and your job as a good law-abiding citizen is to do exactly what the government tells you. And eventually, when all of us old guys die off, there won't be anybody to fight for your rights, and people will just passively go along with whatever the government tells them. And I can see that happening already. The truth of the matter is, we live in a communist country. Right now, right here, it's not going to be a communist country. It is a communist country. All 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto are being implemented in the United States, even as I speak. If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it is a duck. I don't care what label you call it. So how is that going to affect your sleep tonight? You're going to curl up with your pillow and just have warm, fuzzy dreams? Or are you going to be worried that the United States has already become a communist country because you and your grandparents weren't paying attention? I'm going to call it quits here. I highly recommend that you study our founding documents, read everything that Thomas Jefferson, John Locke, Benjamin Franklin have taught us. We have to get back to the basics. We invented government. They work for us, not the other way around. So if you are taking orders from the government, then basically you're a slave. One last story, very quickly, to emphasize the point. George Bernard Shaw is an English writer. Walked into a bar, and at one time I thought this was just anecdotal, but it turns out I've researched it, it is absolutely true. George Bernard Shaw walks into a bar, sits down at the bar next to some really attractive woman, and they strike up a conversation, probably buys her a drink. And at some point he says, "Would you have sex with me for $1 million?" And she's a little bit stunned by the question. And she goes, "Well, that's a rhetorical question because you don't have $1 million." He eventually pulls out his ID, demonstrates that he is in fact George Bernard Shaw, convinces her that he does have an excessive amount of disposable income and that he could, if he chose to do so, spend $1 million on an evening with this woman. And she goes, "Well, okay, yes, I will have sex with you for $1 million. Then he says, "Will you have sex with me for $5? She goes, "I will not. What kind of a woman do you think I am?" And his response was, "We have already determined what kind of woman you are. Now we are just negotiating a price." I use that as a metaphor for your rights. If you are willing to allow the government to modify or control your rights, then you might be a prostitute and a well-paid prostitute, but you are still a whore. If they are taking your rights and you are not fighting for every right that you have, then you may not have chains and shackles on your ankles, but you are a slave and you are doing the government's bidding. I am not a slave. Nobody tells me what to do. Not the government, not the president, not the FBI agents, not the IRS agents at my door. Nobody tells me what to do. I am a free man, and I may die in a hail of gunfire, but up until that moment, I will be a free man, and I will live my life according to my decisions, not based on some government edict. This is all very, very difficult to understand. Not only do you have to know the information, but you have to have the confidence to defend it. I can teach you the information, but I can't give you the confidence to follow in my footsteps. But at this point, I am prepared to take questions.
All right, if you guys have a question for Michael, go ahead and raise your hand. Then I'll bring you in as a presenter and you can speak to Michael.
They are stunned. They are in shock and finding it difficult to put words into a sentence.
We did have a question. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
We have two questions in the question and answer chat. One was, can you define anarchy?
Anarchy is merely the absence of government. Now, most people misdefine it. They point to the Los Angeles riots after the Rodney King verdict. That was chaos. It is not anarchy. It is true that government was not in control at that moment. However, chaos is what happens when you suddenly remove government control. I use the example of soft drink bottle. You know, if you accidentally shake it up and you pop the cap on your soft drink bottle, it will overflow, it'll foam, it'll, do all sorts of nasty stuff. But that's because the pressure was released too rapidly. After you allow the pressure and temperature to, reach equilibrium, the soft drink will operate the way you expected it would. So the Rodney King riots are not an example of anarchy. They are an example of chaos, which is a specialized short-term problem. But if anybody has been to, a political rally or something like that, or just a staff meeting, nobody in the staff meeting gets up and, hurts anybody else. There are no police officers there to inhibit your latent, hostile tendencies, we can all get along, and there's no government there. So everybody has experienced anarchy at some point in their lives. It is more difficult, admittedly, with larger and larger groups, but it will still work because everybody will be responsible for protecting and defending their own rights and property.
Gary Carmiris, your mic is open if you want to ask a question.
Hey, Michael, how are we doing?
I'm doing really well.
Good, great presentation tonight. Thank you. I would love to participate in your 8-hour session.
Great. I'd love to present it. I'll even come to Canada to present it, even though the US Constitution does not apply directly to Canada, but all the fundamental premises. I mean, do people in China have a right to life? Well, yeah. Do they have a constitution and a Bill of Rights to protect those rights? Well, no. Well, here in the United States, we have a constitution, we have a Bill of Rights, but we don't have a government that respects the Constitution. We don't have a government that respects our rights. The CIA is spying on everything we do. A government at all levels is taking our money. Most of you pay taxes every April 15th, not because you think you're helping build the United States, because you're terrified of going to jail. You're doing it in fear. That's called extortion. So I'd be happy to come up and teach the class in Canada or anywhere else I can find a large enough group of students. My phone number is on my website. I'm very easy to contact. I'm not hiding under a rock anywhere. But
you would do well here in Canada.
Yeah, give me a
We're
call.
common law based, so
Yeah,
the Constitution doesn't give you the rights. Common law does. And
no, that's not true. Nothing gives you your rights other than having been born. The fact that you are here, your rights are inherent. And common law was much older than any of the constitutions we've been talking about, but even common law was invented to protect the rights we already have.
True, because common law is based on natural law. So I kind of misspoke there, but you are correct.
And that's all. I mean, I agree with you 100%. But that's what I meant when I said that we were in this war of words. They twist the definitions around, and it kind of sounds okay, and you go, well, yeah, okay, the greatest good for the greatest number. And then when they start to apply that, you go, well, wait a minute. You go, sorry, you already voted for it because we're a democracy. So in order to win this ideological war, we have to be very, very careful with our wording. And so it's just a habit that I've gotten into, correcting. And I apologize if I sound like a grammar Nazi.
No, I appreciate it.
Yeah, but that's how you.
Refreshing.
Yeah, that's how we stay out of trouble.
No, but I think maybe perhaps you should also put something like a digital course together where people can just sign up in the comforts of their own home, trade value for value, and get access to a wonderful course like this.
My Constitution class is already on the internet in about 350 different places. You can download it for free. There's no point in me charging for it because it's already, available on YouTube and Google.
Well, yeah, but the audio is not that great. I've looked at those. I think you should do a really good fine production, repackage it, and get it back out there, because I think a lot of people would be willing to sign up for that course and partake in this kind of information.
Okay. Well, we shall see. That's the idea that Richard is trying to convince me that people are actually interested in this stuff. But
I'd say he's right.
I know that you would. I am still skeptical.
Genji, do you have a question? I'll open your mic.
Hello, hello.
Hello? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the presentation. It was really informative. I had I guess in the general term, when you're finding out all these new ideas that you presented tonight, in the back of my mind, I have this, you could call it fear of excessive force being used against myself or my family if I were to like, I don't know, stand up, I guess, for the rights. How do you recommend about appeasing this fear? I would say that lingers when you start, venturing inside these inside, figuring this stuff out and learning for yourself and figuring out, okay, well, I have rights that nobody. Oh, you have, they're alienable, but it's that they've been obfuscated for so long. And then you just go about life as is. But once you find these things out, and hey, for example, the driver's license thing, if I get pulled over, and how do you recommend? What's your general approach, and what would you recommend people to do in this?
Well, I can't really recommend anything except to let you know that fear is learned and it can be unlearned. The reason that you experience fear is that because from, the time of our birth up until now, we are constantly conditioned to seek permission. When you're 5 years old, you have to ask mom and dad for permission. Can I watch TV? Can I stay up late? Can I have ice cream? Because mom, you're incapable of, providing for yourself. So you got to do everything that mom and dad tells you to do. And then you go to school. Now you got to do everything the teacher tells you to do. You didn't turn in your homework. You got to stay after school. Get a driver's license, and now you got to listen to the police officer. Use your blinker, turn from the right-hand lane, whatever. And then you get out of college, you get a job, and your manager is managing your life. You have to have your reports in by Friday. You have to have your timesheets filled out. And, if you want a vacation, you got to like get down on bended knee and beg for Saturday and Sunday off because, gosh, you'd like to go, spend your child's birthday. So you've been trained to ask for permission. Now, when do you grow up? When do you become an adult? When do you start making decisions for yourself? Well, that's something that you've got to learn. All right. Now, specific to your question, how, you're terrified that, the big bad government is going to, come and hurt you. Well, the government can hurt you even if you don't do anything. They don't need an excuse. They can just, like throw you in jail for no good reason. They'll invent a reason. When in 2000, I was running for state representative here in Texas, I was invited to the Capitol building to give a speech at a Second Amendment rally. The Republicans said, we don't want to pass gun laws too quickly. The Democrats said, we only want to pass rational gun laws. I got up to the microphone and I said, 23,000 gun laws in this country are unconstitutional, and I am not giving my gun to any, state or federal authority, period. The Capitol Guard, we've got the Texas Rangers, acting as the security at the Capitol. They've got the, beige uniforms and the white cowboy hats. They're turning around and staring at me. They can't believe I said that out loud at a microphone. My mother is thrilled. Her young boy is growing up. He's speaking at the Capitol. So we're talking on the phone, and Mom said, what did you say? And because I was still an idiot, I told her. And she goes, oh, Michael, my God, the government is going to pick you up. And I said, why do you think the government is going to pick me up? Do you think the government is good and benevolent and that the government only has my best welfare in mind? Or do you know that the government is evil? Do you know that the government will try to hammer down any nail that's standing up. Okay, the reason that you are in fear of my life is because you know the government is evil. So, when I was a boy and my brothers and I was growing up, who taught us that we should always do the right thing, no matter how difficult it was? Who taught us that? Mom. I said, now I understand that my government is corrupt, probably the most corrupt government on the face of the planet, and you want me to sit on the sofa and watch it happen? No, I am not going to do that. I very likely will die in a hail of gunfire. I'm not making that up. I'm not saying that as hyperbole, but I am a radical. A friend of mine got a job with the NSA. They were asking him computer geek questions, and at the end of his interview, they said, "What's the nature of your relationship with Michael Badnarik?" The NSA mentioned me by name. I said, "That is so cool." My friend said, "Really? You think that's cool?" I go, "Absolutely. Everybody in the United States goes to bed afraid of the government. I go to bed knowing that the government is afraid of me. You can't buy publicity like that." So I can tell you what is. I can let you read the Declaration of Independence. I strongly recommend that you read the law. I'm not lying to you when I say we created the government. You do not require government permission to exist. However, the government does require our permission to exist. Simple statement of fact. I mean, I don't think that you can refute that. But if you are afraid of your government, all the more reason to stand up and defend your rights. Because if you don't defend your rights, it is only going to get worse. Good luck. I can teach you how to shoot. Any other questions?
Hey, Michael, I got a question from Amos that says, please talk a little bit about statutory law and how it differs from constitutional law.
Okay, this is chapter further into the class. The Constitution is divided into 7 articles. Article 1 tells you all about the legislative branch. Article 2 tells you everything about the executive branch. Article 3 tells you about the judicial branch. Article 3.2.1 says that Congress shall have the authority in common law, equity law, and admiralty law. Common law is all about property, land. Admiralty law is all about the sea. Okay? You got law of the land and law of the sea. Statutory law is extra constitutional. Now, let me explain that. If Richard and I go to Paris, we're sitting along the Champs-Élysées, and I reach over and I pilfer somebody's croissant. They will probably start yelling at us in French, and if Richard and I don't understand French, we still know why they are pissed, because I've stolen their breakfast. But I go, "Don't worry, Richard. I know everything there is to know about the Constitution." We go into a French courtroom. Can I recite the Constitution to them? Well, yeah, they may actually listen. But the U.S. Constitution has no business in French law. The French have their own sets of law. French law is completely legitimate, but it is outside the Constitution. It is extra constitutional. Statutory law was invented in 1933 when Franklin Delano Roosevelt tried to take gold away from us as a useful form of money. Took the gold away, gave us Federal Reserve notes or legal tender, which is colorable money. It looks like money, spends like money, may even smell like money, but it is not legally money. It is colorable money. And if you have colorable money, you must have colorable law to adjudicate it. So the Uniform Commercial Code was invented, and statutory law derives from Uniform Commercial Code. It is private law, which is why you have to pass the bar exam and get a franchise for practicing law. If I start to talk about statutory law and tell you what you should or should not do, I go to jail for practicing law without a license. I can tell you all about common law, equity law, admiralty law. I can talk about those until I'm blue in the face, and I have created no infraction. But if Richard and I decide to sell hamburgers, and I go, Richard, I got this great idea. We're going to call them McDonald's hamburgers. I don't think we're going to get a cheeseburger out the door before we're surrounded by lawyers and taken to jail for, fraud, because we do not have a McDonald's franchise. You have to have a franchise before you can sell McDonald's hamburgers. You must have a statutory franchise. You must be a certified lawyer before they will allow you to dispense with all of their stuff. So statutory law is outside the Constitution. It is not unconstitutional any more than French law is unconstitutional. But when you go into a courtroom, you can ask the judge, what jurisdiction is this? Is this common law, equity law, admiralty? The answer will be no. And then you can apologize for taking up their time, because as, a person with rights, you expect one of those three versions of law, and you really don't belong in a statutory jurisdiction. But you got to be really careful, people. The United States government, everything it does is based on fraud. They will lie, they will cheat, they will kill. And if you don't think the US government will kill in order to get what it wants, then you're too naive to be taking this class. They will do anything in their power. I have a personal friend who is currently serving his 7th out of 27-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. Not just any federal penitentiary, but it's a CMU, a communications management unit. It's like Guantanamo Bay inside the United States. It's in Terre Haute, Indiana. And you can look it up on Wikipedia. But my buddy is in jail because he has said things that were deliberately misinterpreted. He said that if the government were to get out of line, if the government was to get completely diabolical, then the people, Americans would have justification for overthrowing the government. That's all the things that I just said early in this class. It's all true. The Declaration of Independence says so. We can alter or abolish it. And all my friend did was verbalize that. And they said, oh, he is trying to kill police officers and judges. And they put him in jail. They lied. The FBI fucking set him up. So your fear of the government is well-founded, but if you are afraid of the government, you are incapable of changing it. You are already a slave. You need to train yourself to not be afraid of the government.
Michael, does the government exist by consent of the governed?
It is supposed to. However, it doesn't anymore. There is something called a, I just had it on the tip of my tongue, a continuity of government document. In other words, they are determined to make sure that the US government as it currently exists doesn't disappear. They have rules on the books that would prevent the American public from rising up and overthrowing the government. They've got underground shelters and all kinds of stuff. It's science fiction. And, you know, if you don't believe that you don't know who the first president of the United States is, then you're never going to believe some of the other stuff that I know.
What are some good first steps one can make to inject a bit more freedom in their local community?
Wow. Well, the first thing you've got to do is educate yourself. This class, the full 8 hours, is an introduction to the Constitution. I'm just opening up a bunch of can of worms to get your brain activated to make you think about things in a different way. But I strongly recommend that you continue your education, read the Law by Frederick Bastiat, read and understand the Declaration of Independence, probably the most succinct declaration of liberty that has ever been put pen to paper. Read anything by Thomas Jefferson, any of the founding fathers. Study up. Find out all this stuff that you don't know. And then start exercising your First Amendment speech. You know, get groups together, talk about this stuff to your friends. There is an adage, they say, and it is generally believed, that you should not talk about religion or politics in public. Really? If you don't talk about religion or politics in public, how the F are you going to fix it? The First Amendment exists so that we can have discourse about what the government is or is not doing right. Okay? If the government, hypothetically, if the government is violating the Constitution, somebody's going to have to talk about it. You're going to have to stand in a soapbox and I say, I think IRS taxes are way too high. Are you with me? I think 23,000 gun laws are unconstitutional. Are you with me? If you're not willing to talk about it, you're not willing to exercise those rights. So I don't know. I would say, first of all, get educated. Second of all, have a store of food. You should have at least 6 months worth of food locked up someplace and have the ability to obtain water. It just for survival, you need at least a gallon of water a day. And that's for drinking, ladies. That does not include any of your hygiene. So 365 gallons of water per person. You got a family of 5, you better be building a swimming pool to contain all the water. Much more efficient is to have some supply of water, but have filters where you can collect water and filter the contaminants out of it. So you have food. Convert all of your disposable income into precious metals, gold, silver, and lead. People say, lead? Lead is a precious metal? Yes, it's what's going to protect the gold and silver. Third, you need to have guns. I'm really, really sorry, but there's no way that you're going to be able to protect your rights using the First Amendment. I don't care how sweetly you talk, how succinctly you narrate. The government is just going to come and take your stuff unless you can physically stop them. So it's up to you. Okay, the government has guns and they are willing to use them. If you don't have guns and you're not willing to use them, then you don't even have a chance. You don't even have a chance. You are fodder waiting to stand in front of a cannon. And then third, start to organize. Most of you probably don't even know your neighbors. When I was growing up, people would sit on the front porch. We would talk to our neighbors. Everybody in the community knew everybody else. If I was doing something wrong and my parents weren't there, the neighbors' adults would yell at me. And they would call my parents, and when I got home, I really got the shit kicked out of me. For something, everybody took part. It was a neighborhood. It was a community. Now, I go a restaurant and I see these millennials, 4 of them, sitting in a booth. Everybody is on their damn iPhone. Everybody is texting. They're probably texting each other. What kind of community is that? So once you get to know this stuff, organize a barbecue. Doesn't have to be expensive. Hot dogs, potato chips, just get people together. You know, are you storing food? Did you know this about the Constitution? Did you take Michael's class? Did you order his book? We are in serious trouble. We live in a communist country. So start exercising your First Amendment rights so that you will be less likely to require your Second Amendment rights. If the First Amendment doesn't work, the Second Amendment will.
What arguments would you make against a cop when you're pulled over and you don't have a license? How do they respond?
I get pulled over. It says, Mr. Badnarik, can I see your driver's license? No, you may not. Why not? Well, because I don't have one. Why not? Well, because the state of Texas wouldn't give me one. Why not? Well, because I don't have a social security number. Why not? Well, because I don't need one, don't want one. And he goes, that's the most unusual excuse I've ever heard. That it is not an excuse, it is the law. And I explained to him that traveling is a right. Driving is a legal term, and it involves commerce. It involves buying or selling or transporting goods or passengers. I'm not doing any of that. I'm not engaged in commerce. Therefore, I am not driving. And he says, I suspect I will see you in court. I said, you will if you show up. I've been stopped by police officers so many times, and I stand out of the car. I give them a 20 or 30-minute Constitution class, and I've had them just kind of wave their hand at me. They'd like, get back in the car, leave us alone. Because they're not willing to challenge any of my information. I had one police officer pull me over and says, you don't have a driver's license, you have no insurance, so we're going to impound your car. I said, really? So then you're telling me that you're going to violate my Fifth Amendment rights? No, sir, no, we would never violate your Fifth Amendment rights. I said, well, it sure sounds like it to me. If you're preventing me from going to the airport, so you're depriving me of liberty. You're trying to deprive me of property by taking my car. And the Fifth Amendment says that I cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And unless you are the judge, jury, and executioner, this little roadside chat does not constitute due process of law. Now, does it? He's going, well, I said, did you take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution? He goes, well, yeah. I said, so I can file a lawsuit against you for treason, for violating my rights? And he'd go, what? I said, and it's going to take me some time, maybe 6 or 12 months, but I'm going to file a lawsuit against you under Title 48 of the United States Code for acting under a presumption of authority, and another lawsuit under Title 18 for acting under color of law. And it's going to take me a while, 6 to 12 months, but at the end, I'm going to own your house and your car. And he is staring at me with his mouth open. I said, excuse me, do you have a jet ski? He goes, just a minute, sir, just a minute. He goes running back to his fellow officers who are clustered at the back of my car. He comes back, hands me my key and my passport at the time, and says, we would like you to park your car over there. Meaning we'd like it, but we can't force you to do it because we have no authority to do it. So I'm not saying, oh, I forgot to renew my license, or, I'm sorry, I didn't know that it was expired. I'm saying don't want one, can't force me. Well, if having a driver's license was really the law, a first semester law student should be able to take this to court and make it a slam dunk. But again, you have to know the information. You have to be brave enough to stand up and defend this information. And over the years, I've gotten smarter and braver, and nobody tells me what to do. Nobody.
Mr. Hogarth asks, he works at a public school, and today there was a sign on the front door that read, "Attention students, you must have permission to leave school during school hours. Leaving school without permission will result in Saturday school and your car will be searched. Is this a violation of the students' rights?"
That's a rhetorical question. You don't have to ask me if it's a violation. You asked me the question because you know it's a violation. What you're looking for is for me to, big constitutional scholars like, oh, yep, I was right because Michael agreed with me. When you get married, if you have a marriage license, that is a contract, and there are three parties in the contract: the man, the woman, and the state. The state is now a legal partner in this contract, and they have a vested interest in the outcome of this contract. Well, what is the outcome of a marriage contract, usually 9 months later? The children. Why can the government knock on your door and say, you're under arrest because your children are not in school? How do they have the authority to do that? What is the legal nexus? The legal nexus is that you asked for permission to be married. That's why they have permission to do that. You gave them the permission. And so you have the child. It is the government's child, and you are given permission to feed the child, diaper the child, but you must send the government's children to school. And the government will teach their children anything they want to teach them. And, you're just there to keep the children alive. I don't remember the exact circumstances of the story. There was a family with 6 children, and Child Protective Services came and confiscated all 6 children. Interestingly enough, the youngest child that had been most recently born never got a social security number, never got a birth certificate. And so a day later, the government brought the youngest child back because they had no legal authority to take it in the first place. So, yes, they are violating your rights. And the best way to stop your children from being violated is to stop sending them to school. Why are you doing that? They're not learning anything. They're getting participation trophies. They are indoctrination centers. They are not education centers. And anybody sending their children to a government facility on a daily basis does not love their children. Or they certainly don't understand the circumstances upon which they're subjecting their children. I would never send my children to a school, ever. And I happen to know a lot of people, some of whom are on this call, who are homeschooling. And I'm very proud of those people. And those children are always the smartest. If you watch the annual spelling bee, United States Spelling Bee, I think it's like 8 or 9 years in a row now, the child who won the spelling bee was homeschooled.
Do you have anything to speak regarding to TSA activities? You speak about the difference in being a driver and someone who's traveling. Is there a correlation for airline travel, or are there only options a microwave scan versus a pat down?
I'm sure there are situations, but I haven't studied that yet. I mean, I'm only one guy. I hate to break it to you, but I am not omniscient. I don't know all the answers. And so I have never attempted to go through TSA with anything other than my passport. But I go through, the first thing they do is look at your boarding pass and your identification. And then I put my boarding pass in my teeth and I hold it in my teeth until I get out of security and, you know, I'm back in the terminal area. And as I went through security one day, I had a young girl, TSA agent. She was really, really cute, and I'm sure she was trying to be helpful. She saw me with my boarding pass in my teeth, and she genuinely thought she was helping a frazzled traveler. She reached up and she tried to take the boarding pass out of my teeth for me. And I yanked my head to one side, took the boarding pass out of my teeth, and I said, "Don't do that." She goes, "Why not?" I said, "It's part of my security procedure." She looked at me real funny. I said, "If I'm not holding my boarding pass in my teeth, I am likely to say something, and then you're going to have to arrest me." And she didn't know if I was kidding or not. So I know how to get through TSA security as quickly and painlessly as possible. I do that. I'm sure that there is probably some legal way to do it without, I don't know, any of the pat down searches, but I don't know what they are.
That's all the questions I have in Zoom. If anybody else wants to raise their hand and have a burning question for Michael Badnarik. Otherwise, there was a request for you to join us in the clubhouse after the presentation for further discussion.
I will do that. I will also post my phone number. I am happy to answer questions for short periods of time, but I'm not going to talk and give everybody my 8-hour class individually over the phone. That's just not a practical use of my time. My book is available in print. It's also available in audiobook, and you need to start doing some of this study on your own. I'm willing to help point you in the right direction, but I'm not going to hold your hand and write legal documents for you. That's not the purpose of my life.
Michael, where can we get your books?
My website is constitutionpreservation.org. My phone number is 512-461-0995. Send me a text before you call me. I don't answer calls from numbers I don't recognize, but if you send me a text, I will text you back and call you as soon as I can. Again, that number is 512-461-0995. Don't tell me a life story. Don't start telling me a 1-hour story about how you got pulled over and they looked in your trunk, and I don't care. I don't care. Ask me a question, I'll give you an answer, but I'm not going to spend all my life on the phone answering your detailed question. But yes, I will join you in, which group are we supposed to be in?
The clubhouse chat.
I will go to Clubhouse chat right now. And I want to thank everybody for being here. Please spread this information, lighting the fires of liberty one heart at a time. You start a forest fire with one match. Now your job, your responsibility to share this information with as many people as you can.
Thank you, Michael. Everyone else, will see you in the clubhouse.
Okay, I'll be there.